Thank you so much, sir. For people to know what exactly we are discussing in this discussion with Mr. Ashish Kapoor from Ernst& Young, well, our discussion is basis how do biases in compensatory hiring lead to workplace pay parity issues. It is a labor special day. Why not discuss this ever debatable topic on pay parity issues, because it is something that has been ingrained in us, and it is prevalent in not just the corporate realm. It is out in Bollywood, it is out in Hollywood. It is a global problem, it's a global phenomena. So it's got not, I mean, it's not restricted to one segment, I would say. Just a brief introduction and a crux to what we'll be discussing today. Well, compensating hiring, is a practice that is often used to address historical discrimination and promote diversity in the workplace. However, if not implemented correctly, it can lead to biases and that perpetuate in form of pay parity issues. Biases in compensatory hiring can occur at multiple stages, from recruitment process to performance evolutions, resulting in unequal pay for employees who perform the same job. It is actually relatable. It is gender specific, basically. Men, yeah, women always feel that, while they are in a proper competitive world today, doing exactly what men also do, but then they're not paid in accordance to their skills. So this topic today, we'll explore the ways in which biases and compensatory hiring can lead to pay parity issues in the workplace. And on the same side, also, we'll offer solutions to address these challenges by talking to Mr. Kapoor. So by understanding and addressing these biases, organizations can create a more equitable and inclusive workplace for all the employees. So, sir, today, we'll understand, first of all, the reason behind we're in 21st century, but we're still facing these issues of pay parity across globe. And, how can we overcome them? This is something that is on top of our discussion today. It's a hot topic. My first question to you, sir, how do biases impact compensatory hiring, and what are some of the biases that affect, these hirings influencing pay parity issues?
Sure, sure. Thanks, Sugandh, and thanks everyone. I think let me just try and start with reiterating what Sugandh you just mentioned with regards to the compensatory hiring. I think it's I spoke to a lot of TA professionals, and sometimes they are also not very aligned or are aware of how does it impact, how does this really impact an organization, and both the pros and the cons. So, like you rightly said, just reiterating, it is a hiring practice that aims to address existing inequalities that are there in the workforce by
Right.
giving preferences to members of some underrepresented groups. While this practice can be effective in promoting the diversity and inclusion in workplace, but biases in compensatory hiring can lead to a lot of pay parity issues, like you rightly said.
Right.
Now, one way that biases in compensatory hiring can lead to pay parity issues is just by perpetuating the idea that certain groups are inherently less valuable or skilled than others. Again, for example, same thing that you mentioned, if a company believes that women are not as competent as men in certain roles, they may just be more likely to hire women at lower level positions and men at higher level positions. Just as simple as that. And that leads to a situation where women are consistently paid less than men, even when they are
Exactly.
performing maybe similar job or same level of job. Another way that biases in compensatory hiring can lead to pay parity issues by creating a culture of tokenism. I don't know if you've heard about this, but tokenism is a practice of hiring a few members of underrepresented groups as a way of appearing diverse without
Exactly.
actually addressing the underlying issues of discriminating and bias. So, when companies engage in tokenism, they may hire members of these underrepresented groups for lower level positions again, or positions that are not as well paid as other positions in the company. And this again leads to a situation where members of these underrepresented groups are consistently paid less with their counterparts who are not members of underrepresented groups.
Hmm.
Uh, Now, how do biases impact? Of course, there is stereotyping, first of all, which we spoke about, which is the tendency to assume that people of certain groups share certain characteristics or behaviors. For example, assuming women are not as competent as men in certain roles, or these stereotypings can influence compensatory hiring by leading to hiring of underrepresented groups for lower level positions or positions that are well paid, not well paid. Now, the other sort of bias is affinity bias, which is
Okay.
just the tendency to favor people who are in similar to oneself, who is hiring or has a similar background, has a similar experience. has a similar interest. Now, affinity bias can influence compensatory hiring by leading to hiring of a candidate who are of similar nature, hiring to the similar nature of the hiring manager. Now, that might not be the most qualified candidate. This
Okay.
can perpetuate pay parity issues by limiting opportunities for underrepresented groups. Similarly, there's halo effect. We talk about it a lot. Halo effect is nothing but the tendency to assume that that because a person possesses one positive trait, they possess other positive traits as well. We just assume. For example,
That's a
assuming that
game
a
of
candidate who
assumption. Yeah.
graduate, yes, for example, we assume that many a times we assume a candidate who has graduated from a prestigious university is also more competent than candidate who did not, just by way of passing out. So halo
Right.
effect can influence compensatory hiring by leading to a selection of candidate based on one positive trait rather than evaluating candidates overall objectively. you know and I think lastly, probably unconscious bias. This is obviously the most important one. This refers to biases that are outside of our conscious awareness, and this can influence our decision without us even realizing it. Unconscious biases can influence compensatory hiring by leading to selection of candidates just based on factors such as gender, race, ethnicity, rather than evaluating them objectively. This is happening without us knowing.
Hmm.
Just because you are, let's say, fond of hiking and traveling and doing adventure sports. When you meet a candidate, and there is this person who talks about how he or she is really into adventure sports, there's this unconscious bias that makes you talk more, understand more, and instead of objectively looking at the overall candidate, you like that trait, and the unconscious bias kicks in and you prefer to select that person.
Right.
So the various biases of course keep happening, and to address these biases, I would say, in compensatory hiring and promoting pay parity, companies should implement trainings, education programs to raise awareness in general of biases. What are the various type of biases, how to counter them. And additionally, companies can always establish objective criteria for evaluating candidates, which basically means implementing more maybe blind hiring practices or removing identifying informations from resumes and applications, various steps.
Hmm.
So yes, in a gist, this is how I would say, to your
No,
question, that
very well
biases
categorized.
impact
Actually, all
compensatory
these
hiring.
problems are something that we are experiencing on daily basis. But categorizing them in a way wherein we understand which is more often felt or experienced
Yeah.
within an employee base is a sane way to actually put across the problem as well as the solutions. Now, according to you, from an HR's perspective, what role does the HR policies and practices play in mitigating biases in such kind of hiring and promoting pay parity?
Okay. So then HR policies, of course, play a very crucial role. Without,
Okay.
it doesn't have to be debated in mitigating most of these biases in compensatory hiring and also promoting pay parity. Some of the ways in which HR policies can help. One, of course, is having a very, very well thought through diversity and inclusion policy. Companies can develop and implement diversity and inclusion policies that very explicitly state the company's commitment to diversity inclusion and also provide guidance on how to achieve that particular goal. These policies help create in general, a culture that values diversity and promote equal opportunities for all employees. So, just having those policies in black and white. The other, of course, is the objective criteria for hiring. Now, HR policies and practices can establish a lot of objective criteria for evaluating candidates, such as educational qualification, work experiences, job related skills. These things can help reduce the influence of biases in hiring decisions and promote a very fair and equitable hiring process. There's a lot of blind hiring practices. I was talking about it earlier. Now,
Right.
companies implement a lot of tools that implement blind hiring practices, which remove any identifying information like name, gender, race from resumes and application. And this helps reducing the influence of unconscious bias.
Exactly.
You're
And
looking
many
for
companies are
masters
actually
of business.
practicing it as well.
Correct, correct. You're looking for a master's in business administration in finance. If you feel that there is a bias that could creep in because of the university advantage. Now, in HR, you are part of BW people. You know about human resources. XLRI tests. These are the two topmost institutes, and a lot of people prefer hiring people who are passing out from Symbiosis XLRI tests. Now, that does
Right.
not mean that people are passing out from other universities do not fare well or do well or understand things well. The other bit is pay equity policy. I think this is the latest thing. Companies can are now establishing a lot of pay equity policies that ensure equal pay for equal work, regardless of gender, race, or other characteristics. So these policies help address pay parity issues, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
promote a more fair and equitable compensation system. And lastly, I would say a lot of impetus on ongoing training and education. This, companies keep churning, people keep churning, right? I mean, people come and go. There has to be this consistent impetus on training and education where companies have to provide a lot of ongoing training and education to employees, managers, counselors, and especially recruiters on topics such as unconscious bias, diversity and inclusion, fair hiring practices. This helps to raise awareness of biases and promote a culture that values overall diversity and inclusion. So in summary, I would say HR policies play a very crucial role in mitigating these compensatory hiring and promoting pay parity, and by establishing these objective criteria for hiring, implementing these blind hiring practices, ongoing training, education, most of the companies can create a very fair and equitable hiring process, and a very diverse and inclusive workforce.
Okay. Okay. Do you also feel, or do you think it is something it is prevailing, but it is not laid emphasis to? A lot many companies claim that they are setting certain examples of compensatory hiring programs that have successfully addressed pay parity issues. In your view, do you have any anecdote or an analysis to share? I wouldn't ask you to name certain companies, but considering that you've been a veteran in this field, do you actually feel that there are companies today who actually have certain examples of hiring programs wherein they've successfully addressed pay parity issues, and where employees feel that we are being awarded or we are being rewarded in
Right.
competence to what skills we carry and what is our experience and what is the role that was offered to us?
Hmm, hmm. So, I mean, I won't talk too much about EVA. I think EVA is a very, as an organization, as a brand, is very well established out there. And it's very clear in consulting, especially management consulting and other places, that it's a role and it's a job. It has nothing to do with, who gets hired at that
Hmm.
particular role. You could be a PWD candidate, you could be a LGBTQ, community personnel, you could be a female, a male. It just does not matter what race, religion you come from. If you hired for a role, you get salary for that role. So it's as simple as and as clear. I think that's one of the important things. And of course, there's consistently a lot of evaluation that we do internally within EY, which is more to do with every few quarters, every quarter, an evaluation of where do we stack in terms of organizations outside, which is just benchmarking, but also an internal benchmarking to see how are
Hmm.
people placed. Are people with similar experience, similar qualification paid the same amount or not? So that's an existing exercise which we follow in, and a very extensive exercise that's done at the end of the year as well. So that's more for my present company. A lot of other organizations, Mahindra and Mahindra, for example, I can share their, one of the examples. So they have the DNI initiative. They
Exactly.
of course, are a famous Indian multinational automobile manufacturing corporation. They implemented a DNI initiative that aims to promote gender diversity and pay parity. The company has set a goal to increase the proportion of women in its workforce to 25% by 2025. Just by the nature of the organization, you might assume that women might not have a lot of roles. So they've implemented several policies. They've implemented a lot of trainings, making sure there's unconscious bias trainings for managers, for gender neutral recruitment processes. And they've also gone ahead and started setting up plans which are women only plans. I mean, they're going to that extent just so
Right.
that they are able to generate and tell that yes, there's no difference. It's the same job, the person is doing it, and therefore get the same
And I would
sort
like
of
to
salary.
bring this to the notice of everyone hearing that it is, you talked about tokenism, that, companies are adopting certain policies. So this is not an example of tokenism, because companies like ENY are not just talking about it, they're implementing processes and integrating ways on how can how can other companies feel relieved and imbibe certain policies from companies like you. So
Correct.
it is not an example of tokenism that they have just put in a checklist or they have certain policies. They are implementing these policies in every other realm of their workforce ecosystem. So, as you rightly said, women are not much represented in the STEM segment, in engineering segment, in handling plants. But Mahindra, companies like Mahindra, they're actually taking this onus of going over the board and having women in that segment as well. Not just women. I also have examples of companies wherein people from LGBTQ, people from
Yes,
PWD are even being involved in processes like these, wherein they feel that their caliber is not something which is up to the mark for such segments. But then they're proving it wrong, because you're
correct,
hiring basis
correct,
talent, you're not hiring basis somebody's sexual preference or physical abilities. If the person has a caliber to do, at least give him that space to explore and prove their calibers. So
yeah,
your
yeah,
examples, I wanted to make people clear, it's not an example of tokenism, it is an example of
correct.
actualization, wherein companies are
Yes.
putting in efforts to
No,
initiate
no,
such
you're
programs.
absolutely right. Yeah, and many more companies. I mean, not to go into detail, but Tata Steel, Wipro
Yeah,
has the Women of Wipro program. There's ICICI Bank. A lot of organizations are making sure that they
access.
are
Yeah,
aiding processes and policies just to establish this, out there, like you rightly said, in the market, that you get paid for what you do, and
right.
and nothing else matters. So yeah.
In your view, what steps can organizations take to ensure that compensatory hiring programs are inclusive and accessible to all employees, regardless of background and identity? Because it is something that I've touched upon, but people would still like to know the organization's role here, wherein they can understand that there is still space for them to apply. There are many who don't even apply, thinking that, let's say EY or Tatas are such big conglomerates and big four companies, that why would they even look at us when they have people from
Yeah.
IIMC and Symbiosis being hired like on the cream level itself?
No, no, rightly said. And I think this is a myth. You're absolutely right. That gets created in the market, that, these are the companies which we can't even apply for or go to.
Exactly.
And I think continuously, it's not just for the people, but for these companies to break these myth
Hmm.
and come out in the open. Social media, is everywhere. Everybody has access. Just be out there in the open, promoting, accepting, and asking for, applications, asking for them to at least give it an attempt, try. From an organization's perspective, Sugandha, I would say a few steps, of course, that they can take is: one is to review and revise job descriptions and qualifications regularly.
Okay.
Organizations can review job descriptions and qualifications to ensure that they are very inclusive. They do not create unnecessary barriers for candidates from underrepresented groups. They can also consider alternate qualifications or skills that may be
Mhm.
relevant to the portfolio, but traditionally was not required. That doesn't
Okay.
happen. Earlier, if you know that a chartered accountant is required to do a particular job, you have to keep thinking, do my mix change? Can somebody else who's not a CA do the same job? Why
Hmm.
not? So unless it's a regulatory requirement, of course. Now, the other bit will be, I would say, broadening the pool of candidates in general. So broaden the pool of candidates to promote diversity and inclusion. They can do that by reaching out to underrepresented communities, like I said earlier, and using a lot of diverse recruitment channels. This can include partnering with community organizations. This can include attending career fairs and events targeted at underrepresented groups. There's a lot. BW, just did this amazing PWD session some time back, and I was part of it.
Right.
So I know some of these fairs, career fairs, forums are the places where the organizations have to go represent themselves and ask that, we are open, please apply. And
Right.
of course, using a lot of job boards to cater to diverse candidates. The other bit is implementing more diverse interview panel. Now, organizations also have to create diverse interview panels that reflect the diversity of candidate pool.
Hmm.
This can help ensure that the candidates are evaluated more fairly and without bias. They can also provide training to individual interviewers, of course, to help them identify and avoid unconscious biases. They should continue to support and offer support and accommodations, which means organizations can often offer support and accommodation to candidates who may face barriers in hiring process. This could include providing language support, for example, offering accommodations for candidate with disabilities, making sure you're telling them, what is the way the company will make it supportive and easy and smooth for them to work on a day-to-day basis. Then providing support for candidates who may need to take time off for interviews and assessment. Changing and aligning to them that, okay, you can only take off time because of your schedule, because of your family on a weekend. we are aligning, we will make sure that we evaluate you on a weekend. Just telling them that there is flexibility. So,
Right.
so that's one. And of course, lastly, just implementing pay equity policies, which we talked about earlier, which ensure employees are paid fairly, regardless of the background and identity. I think that includes conducting a lot of regular pay audits. I was talking about that at EY,
Mhm.
ensuring that pay is based on objective criteria and implementing policies to address any disparity that is identified. That's also important. Once you
Mhm.
identify a disparity, how do you fix it? And how do you make sure it's not repeated again? So I would say these are just some of the steps that organizations can take to ensure compensatory hiring programs are inclusive and accessible to all employees.
Thank you so much, sir. They were quite comprehensive in approach and easy to hear because see, it's very heartening to hear from people who are actually putting in efforts to have all these policies in place and not just talk about it. So, so in your view, how can the broader societal context, including gender and racial inequalities, contribute to biases in compensatory hiring and perpetuate pay parity issues? This is one of a segment that I am targeting specifically because as an employee or belonging from an employee community, I know I have peers, I have colleagues facing issues in this aspect as well. While it may come as a surprise, but it is something that has been pertaining specifically in the
Yeah.
corporate realm. So how can how can this issue be addressed and solutions can be imparted?
No, no, you're right, Sugan. I mean, as much as we try, everybody's just trying, but you're not able to eradicate this completely. So
Exactly.
the broader societal context, including gender or racial inequalities, definitely contribute to a lot of biases in the compensatory hiring and perpetuate pay parity issues in workplace. In a lot of ways, one is stereotyping and biases.
Hmm.
Most important, stereotype and biases based on gender, race, other identities can influence the hiring process overall and perpetuate pay disparities. For example, again, same thing, women are less competent, committed, or less committed than men, and therefore can lead to them being paid less. The other is unequal access to education and trainings. Now, unequal access to education and training can limit opportunities for certain groups, isn't it?
Hmm.
I mean, making it therefore more difficult for them to compete for the same high paying jobs. If
Right.
my schooling or whatever other bits that I was supposed to do from a solution, or rather picking up a skill, if my training is not apt to somebody else, and therefore that person is getting an additional amount, there is an unequal access because I couldn't access that training. It could be fees, it could be just availability, it just could be entrance, seats, anything for that matter. So this can perpetuate a lot of pay disparity and limit an upward mobility for individuals with underrepresented groups. The other is discrimination and harassment. Discrimination, harassment based on gender, race, other identities can create a very hostile work environment many a times, and that also limits opportunities for certain groups. This can make it more difficult for individuals from those underrepresented groups to advance in the careers and perpetuate pay disparity even further, right? So and that's something that we constantly have to look out for. Probably one more thing would be lack of diversity in leadership, because
Okay.
a lack of diversity in leadership can perpetuate biases in the hiring process and pay disparity. Leaders who are not representative of the broader workforce may be very less likely to prioritize diversity and inclusion initiatives,
Okay.
or maybe more likely to favor candidates who are similar to themselves. So making sure the leadership team, sometimes when we were focusing last decade or two, we've been focusing on women hiring, everybody's been, right? The idea was that you can obviously hire, but what about retention, what about engagement? You have to create an ecosystem that there are women at all levels. They are leading groups, they are leading the partners, the senior partners, they're leading sectors, segments. I mean, talking about EY, and that ecosystem is what makes everybody think that yes, we can be there too, yes,
Hmm.
we have the capability to reach there too. So that diversity is required to be in leadership. A lack of diversity will definitely create more issues. And I think lastly, I would say social norms and expectations. A lot of social
Okay.
norms and expectations around gender and race can influence the type of jobs that individual pursue, and the type of roles that they are perceived to be qualified for. This can limit opportunities for individuals from underrepresented groups and again perpetuate pay disparity. Like I can talk about a program we just did for one of the trust called Mitra Trust. EY did that for transgender youth. We had
Okay.
about 35, 40 people come into our office. We had a one-on-one mentoring that our employees are able to provide. And same thing, social norms and expectations. A lot of them, we were talking about business ideas. What do they want to do? Some of them have started their own businesses, but there's this restriction in thinking that because I belong to the community, I can probably own a boutique, or I can just do a tailoring job, or I could just do a tea stall sort of thing. And that's where we wanted to break the stereotype. So I think social norm and expectations also cause. So in summary, broader societal context, including gender and racial inequalities, can contribute to biases in compensatory hiring and perpetuate these pay parity issues in the workplace. And I think these are, I would say, some of the things I wanted to list down.
Thank you so much, Ashish sir. It was a pleasure speaking with you. In the end, if there is one takeaway that we could hear from you holistically on this aspect, what would that be? That people should always, corporate leaders, employees, people from PWD and LGBTQ background, they should always keep in mind while talking about issues of pay parity. What would that one aspect be?
I think difficult to say. There's so many things I want to talk about, but I think one thing I would definitely say to everyone is, if it's not only about the particular type of individual or community, I think everybody needs to raise a voice. If you
Mhm.
see it happening, if you see something which is not right, if you see there's a difference, and if it's not impacting you, does not mean that you should not raise the voice. So the
Exactly.
individuals themselves, but others more importantly, who are blessed, I would say, in certain senses, should definitely raise a voice and say, this is not right. We at EVA have this program called Purple Champions, where people
Okay.
have signed up and say that anything to do with inequality or differential treatment for women or for LGBTQ community, we want to stand by and not let that happen. If we see it happening in workplace, we will not let that happen. People sign up, take a pledge, and these are our champions roaming across all the offices, as individuals are also
So that
working
is
day to
one
day.
aspect that needs
But
to be imbibed across organizations, I would say, because that gives an employee a freedom and a back
yes,
support that, if I stand, I am not somebody who will be penalized, but I'll be supported by thousands and hundreds of others who
correct,
might be facing
correct.
this issue but are not able to stand for themselves. So thank you so much, sir. On this very auspicious day of Labor's Day, we had to discuss this one aspect, and coming from a talent leader, of one of the big fours, it's a pleasure for us and for people hearing out. They had, all sorts of skepticism with regards to pay parity issues and hiring in because of the gender stereotyping. So I believe you've cleared it all. For people who still have questions, who still have their own queries, they want to list down certain things and want to ask Mr. Kapoor. He'll be there on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, wherever you want, and he'll be happy to answer to all your queries.
Sure.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We're really obliged and we're really thankful for you to be taking out time for this discussion.
Thank you, Sugan. My pleasure, and happy Labor Day to everybody again. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.
much, sir.
Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.